It was the deadliest war in human history, a conflict that spanned the entire globe, drawing nations into a vortex of destruction that left no corner of the earth untouched. From the frozen steppes of Russia to the sweltering jungles of the Pacific, the roar of engines and the crash of artillery became the planet's harrowing soundtrack. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to smoldering rubble in a matter of hours. Fields that once yielded bountiful harvests were churned into mud and blood, sown with steel instead of seeds. The very air crackled with a tension that spoke of a world pushed to its absolute limit, a civilization teetering on the brink of self-annihilation. This was a war fought not just on land and sea, but in the skies above and in the hearts of millions. The scale of the devastation was honestly unprecedented. It was a war of numbers so vast they become difficult to comprehend, a litany of loss that echoes through the generations. Tens of millions of lives were extinguished, families were torn asunder, and entire cultures were irrevocably altered. But the visible carnage, the shocking images of bombed-out cities and endless military cemeteries tells only a fraction of the story. Beyond the well-documented campaigns and the famous battles that now fill our history books, another war was being waged. It was a silent, clandestine conflict, fought not with tanks and planes, but with test tubes, strange new technologies, and a terrifying ambition to weaponize the fundamental forces of the natural world itself. This hidden war was conducted in secret laboratories, in remote testing grounds, and in the shadowed minds of scientists who were tasked with a single chilling objective: to gain an absolute advantage, no matter the cost. They sought to harness powers that humanity was never meant to control, to turn the very elements of nature against their enemies. They looked to the sky and dreamed of commanding the storms. They peered into microscopes and plotted to unleash invisible armies of disease. They split the atom and, in a blinding flash, unlocked a destructive force that could unmake creation. This was a war that shattered nations, but it also aimed to defy nature itself, to bend its laws to the will of man. And so, as the world burned, the seeds of a different kind of chaos were being planted. Sirens wailed, bombs dropped, and thunder roared, but the true fury was not just in the weapons of men. The sky itself seemed to bleed, turning an unnatural shade of red over forests set ablaze by incendiary munitions. The earth trembled not only from explosions, but from experiments that probed its deepest secrets. It was here, in the crucible of total war, that something new was born. The conflict didn't just kill millions and reshape the borders on a map. It fundamentally altered the environment, leaving behind a legacy that continues to haunt our planet. Hidden behind the thunderous curtain of the front lines, far from the prying eyes of the public and the strategic maps of generals, a different kind of soldier was at work. These were the scientists, the engineers, and the thinkers, conscripted into a battle of intellect and innovation. Their laboratories became the new battlefields, their beakers and wiring diagrams the new armaments. Driven by the relentless pressures of a global conflict, they were pushed to explore the outermost frontiers of knowledge, to venture into realms that were once the exclusive domain of science fiction. The goal was simple and terrifyingly ambitious: to create a weapon so decisive, so powerful, that it would guarantee victory and end the war once and for all. This pursuit of ultimate power led them down dark and uncharted paths. They began to see the natural world not as a home to be cherished, but as an arsenal waiting to be unlocked. The weather was no longer a force of nature. It was a potential weapon, a storm that could be steered toward an enemy fleet, or a drought that could starve a nation into submission. The intricate web of life, the delicate balance of ecosystems, was viewed as a system to be manipulated. Could insects be turned into vectors for disease? Could bacteria be engineered to be more virulent, more unstoppable? These were the questions whispered in top-secret facilities, questions that spurred experiments of terrifying ingenuity. The experiments were as varied as they were audacious. In fortified bunkers deep underground, physicists worked feverishly to unravel the secrets of the atom, knowing they were racing against time and their counterparts on the other side of the conflict. In isolated research stations, biologists cultivated strains of deadly pathogens, testing their lethality on animals in a grim prelude to their potential use against human populations. Meteorologists were tasked with studying cloud formations not to predict the weather, but to control it. Every fundamental force, from the electromagnetic spectrum to the biological building blocks of life, was scrutinized for its potential as an instrument of war. It was an era of unprecedented scientific hubris, a time when the moral and ethical boundaries of research were blurred by the overwhelming urgency of survival. The old rules no longer seemed to apply. The quest for dominance overshadowed the potential for catastrophic consequences, for blowback that could not be contained or predicted. These secret programs, shrouded in the highest levels of classification, were designed to give humanity dominion over the planet's systems. But in their haste and their ambition, these scientists were tampering with forces far older and more powerful than any army, unknowingly starting a chain reaction that would ripple through the natural world for decades to come. While the war left visible scars upon the landscape, craters, ruins, and the twisted metal of wrecked machinery, the deepest wounds were often invisible. The secret experiments conducted during these years did not just impact the immediate battle zones, they seeped into the very fabric of the environment, leaving a subtle but persistent taint. These were not the loud, explosive changes of a bombing raid, but quiet, insidious alterations that began at a microscopic level. The soil, the water, and the air became unwitting repositories for the byproducts of this hidden war, absorbing chemicals, novel organisms, and radioactive particles whose long-term effects were entirely unknown. The planet itself became a silent casualty of the conflict. Consider the biological experiments where pathogens were weaponized and tested. Many of these deadly microbes were supposed to have been contained and destroyed after the war, their existence erased from official records. But nature is not so easily managed. In the chaos of retreating armies and the hurried dismantling of secret facilities, containment was often imperfect. Vials were misplaced, contaminated sites were improperly sterilized, and some organisms inevitably escaped their laboratory prisons. These microbes, bred for resilience and lethality, found themselves in a new, wild environment. They began to mutate, to evolve, to merge with existing wild species in ways their creators had never anticipated. The legacy of this biological tampering persists today. In the soil of old battlefields and around the decaying remnants of forgotten research outposts, scientists occasionally discover strange strains of bacteria and viruses. These are organisms that seem to have no place in the natural evolutionary tree, ghost cells that bear the genetic markers of laboratory manipulation. They are the living survivors of a war fought between man and nature, a microscopic testament to the experiments that tried to weaponize life itself. They thrive in silence, a permanent and unpredictable addition to the local ecosystem, their potential impact on the wider environment still a disquieting mystery. Similarly, the frantic development of new chemical compounds for warfare, from potent pesticides to advanced incendiaries, left a lasting chemical signature on the land. These substances were dispersed in massive quantities, saturating vast tracts of forest, farmland and waterways. Unlike conventional explosives, many of these chemicals did not simply detonate and disappear. They lingered, breaking down slowly over decades and entering the food chain. They altered the chemistry of the soil, affected the reproductive cycles of wildlife, and left behind sterile zones where little could grow for years. The war ended, but its chemical ghosts remained, silently rewriting the rules of life in the ecosystems they had poisoned. The war did not just kill millions, it awakened something that still haunts our planet today. The cumulative effect of these secret experiments, from manipulating the weather to engineering plagues, was to profoundly disturb the delicate equilibrium of the natural world. It was as if humanity, in its desperate struggle for supremacy, had struck a dissonant chord that sent tremors through the entire symphony of life. The planet was not a passive stage for human conflict. It was an active, interconnected system, and it began to react in strange and unpredictable ways. The consequences of these actions were not confined to the past. They became a living, breathing part of our present. The ambition to control the weather is a prime example of this hubris. Scientists believed they could turn the sky into an extension of the battlefield, bending storms to their will. Early, rudimentary forms of cloud seeding and atmospheric manipulation were tested, with pilots flying into storm systems to release chemical agents. But nature does not obey orders. These interventions often had unforeseen and catastrophic results. A storm intended to be weakened might instead intensify. A weather pattern meant to be steered away from one area might be inadvertently redirected toward another, with devastating consequences. These experiments revealed a terrifying truth. Our understanding of the planet's complex systems was dangerously incomplete. Reports from the era are filled with anecdotal evidence of bizarre environmental phenomena in the wake of major battles or near secret testing sites. Soldiers wrote of sudden, unseasonal blizzards in places that should have seen only rain. Farmers spoke of inexplicable droughts that withered crops in regions known for their fertile rivers. Strange colored lights were seen in the sky, causing animals to panic and flee. While many of these accounts were dismissed at the time as battlefield stress or folklore, they paint a consistent picture of a natural world thrown into disarray. Was it possible that the sheer energy released by countless explosions and advanced experiments had disturbed the balance of the planet itself? This is the haunting legacy of World War II's hidden war. It is not just a matter of historical curiosity. It is a story that continues to unfold. The mutated microbes, the chemically altered landscapes, and the lingering instabilities in our climate systems are the ghosts that walk among us. They serve as a stark reminder that our actions, especially those born of conflict and a desire for domination, have consequences that extend far beyond our immediate intentions. We tried to master nature, to force it to submit to our will, but in doing so, we may have simply awakened a more powerful and unpredictable force, one that is still fighting to restore a balance we so recklessly shattered. Long before the atom was split, military strategists gazed upward with a singular, audacious ambition to conquer the sky. This ambition, honestly, went far beyond the dogfights of fighter planes or the lumbering paths of bombers. The true prize was not control of the airspace, but control of the weather itself. In the minds of these planners, the atmosphere was the next great battlefield, a theater of operations where victory could be won without firing a single shot. Imagine being able to conjure a dense fog to conceal an entire invasion fleet, or to summon a torrential downpour to bog down an advancing tank division in mud. The strategic possibilities were as limitless as they were terrifying, promising a godlike power over the fortunes of war. This dream of weaponizing the weather was not mere fantasy. It was pursued with grim determination in secret research programs on both sides of the conflict. Scientists were tasked with unraveling the complex mechanics of the atmosphere, not for the sake of pure knowledge, but to find its weaknesses, the leverage points where a small intervention could trigger a massive effect. They studied cloud physics, wind patterns, and the electrical properties of the air, all with a military objective in mind. Could a plane dropping a specific chemical agent induce rain over an enemy agricultural region, causing a famine? Could a large-scale release of energy disrupt a storm system, steering it toward a hostile port? These were the questions that drove their clandestine work. The early efforts were often crude and based on fledgling theories. One of the simplest and most persistent ideas was cloud seeding, the process of introducing particles into the air to act as nuclei for raindrops or ice crystals. The concept was straightforward. Find a cloud pregnant with moisture but unwilling to release it, and give it the catalyst it needed. Pilots were sent on perilous missions to fly into unstable weather systems, dispensing everything from fine dust and carbon particles to more exotic chemical compounds. Each flight was a gamble, a dangerous experiment conducted thousands of feet in the air, with the pilots acting as both soldiers and scientists, probing the very anatomy of a storm. This quest to control the elements represented a profound shift in the philosophy of warfare. It moved beyond the traditional domains of land, sea, and air, and into the realm of environmental manipulation. The enemy was no longer just the opposing army. It was the natural world itself which had to be understood, tamed, and ultimately directed as a weapon. This hubris, this belief that humanity could and should command the forces of nature, set the stage for a series of experiments whose consequences would prove to be far more unpredictable and far-reaching than their creators could have ever imagined. The sky was no longer a passive backdrop to human conflict. It was about to become an active participant. While the most aggressive dreams of weather warfare remained theoretical during the war, the research laid a dangerous foundation for what came next. In the immediate aftermath of the conflict, the technology and the ambition did not simply vanish. Instead, they evolved. In 1947, these wartime concepts coalesced into a joint effort by the US military and General Electric, a program that would become infamous in the annals of meteorology project Cirrus. Its public mission was to study hurricanes, to understand their immense power, and perhaps to find a way to weaken them. But its methods were born directly from the weaponized weather research of the war, using military aircraft to deliver a payload into the heart of a storm. The chosen agent was silver iodide, a substance whose crystalline structure was believed to be incredibly effective at seeding clouds and forcing supercooled water to freeze. The theory was that by dropping large quantities of it into the eye wall of a hurricane, scientists could disrupt its heat engine, causing the storm to expand and lose its ferocious intensity. In October 1947, the perfect test subject appeared, a powerful hurricane churning off the coast of Florida, heading safely out to sea. A B-17 bomber, a veteran of the skies over Europe, was loaded with nearly 200 pounds of crushed dry ice and silver iodide and sent to intercept the storm. This was the moment of truth. Flying into the maelstrom, the crew executed their mission, releasing their payload into the swirling chaos of the storm's upper bands. Initially, the experiment seemed to be a spectacular success. Observers reported a visible change in the cloud structure, a diffusion of the storm's well-defined shape. The scientists aboard the plane were jubilant, believing they had proven that humanity could, in fact, tame nature's most violent tempests. They turned the bomber for home, confident that they had struck a decisive blow against the hurricane. But nature, as it so often does, had other plans. The hurricane did not weaken and die out over the Atlantic as predicted. Instead, something went terrifyingly wrong. The storm, which had been tracking steadily northeastward into the empty ocean, stalled. It then made an abrupt, inexplicable U-turn, heading directly for the American coast. It slammed into Savannah, Georgia with renewed fury, causing immense flooding and over $100 million in damage, a staggering sum at the time. Public outcry was immediate and fierce. Had the scientists' meddling turned a harmless storm into a coastal catastrophe? While meteorologists still debate whether the turn was a coincidence or a direct result of the seeding, Project Cirrus became a chilling cautionary tale. It demonstrated that when you provoke the sky, nature sometimes strikes back. Not all weather modification experiments were aimed at creating storms. Some were designed to eliminate them. For Allied bomber crews flying missions over Europe, the greatest enemy was not always enemy fighters or anti-aircraft fire. It was the weather itself. The dense, persistent fog that blanketed British airfields for much of the year was a lethal adversary, responsible for countless crashes and aborted missions. A plane returning from a grueling raid, damaged and low on fuel, could find its home base completely invisible, shrouded in a grey blanket. The desperate need for a solution gave rise to one of the most audacious and brute-force weather modification systems ever devised. Operation FIDO. FIDO, which stood for Fog Investigation and Dispersal Operation, was a testament to wartime ingenuity and desperation. The concept was brutally simple. If you can't see through the fog, burn it away. The system consisted of long pipes installed along both sides of a runway. When an airfield was socked in, millions of gallons of petrol were pumped through these pipes and ignited, creating two towering walls of flame. The intense heat generated by this inferno would raise the air temperature above the dew point, causing the tiny water droplets that form fog to evaporate. For a pilot approaching in the gloom, it was a terrifying and surreal sight. A fiery pathway to safety cut through the blinding fog. The system was incredibly effective, but it came at an enormous cost. It was colossally wasteful, consuming vast quantities of precious fuel. At its peak, FIDO systems burned through 100,000 gallons of petrol per hour to clear a single runway. The environmental impact was staggering, though it was a concern utterly ignored in the face of wartime necessity. The operation belched enormous plumes of black smoke and unburnt hydrocarbons into the atmosphere, creating a localized pocket of extreme pollution. The very air around these airfields would become thick with the smell of burning fuel, and the ground for miles around would be coated in a fine, oily soot. It was a clear example of solving one environmental problem by creating a much larger, albeit more diffuse, one. FIDO saved thousands of airmen and hundreds of aircraft, playing a crucial role in maintaining the Allied bombing campaign, especially during the critical winter months. Yet it stands as a powerful symbol of the war's environmental legacy. It was a system that treated the atmosphere as an obstacle to be violently overcome, a problem to be solved with fire and brute force. It demonstrated a willingness to engage in large-scale atmospheric alteration without any consideration for the long-term consequences. The skies over England may have been cleared for a few crucial hours, but the smoke and chemicals pumped into them contributed to a broader, unseen contamination of the very air the world breathes. Beyond the documented experiments like Project Cirrus and FIDO, a more unsettling pattern began to emerge from the chaos of the war. Soldiers, sailors, and civilians from Europe to the Pacific started reporting strange and violent weather phenomena that seemed to follow in the wake of major military operations. These were not the predictable storms of a seasonal forecast. They were anomalous, unseasonal, and often intensely localized events that defied easy explanation. In the Ardennes forest during the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers fighting in the bitter cold reported sudden freak blizzards that appeared with unnatural speed, burying equipment and men in impossibly deep snowdrifts where heavy rain would have been more typical. These accounts were not isolated incidents. In the Pacific Theater, naval officers logged bizarre weather events following large-scale sea battles. After the massive fleets had clashed, unleashing thousands of tons of high explosives and sending columns of fire and smoke billowing into the sky, strange squalls would sometimes form out of nowhere. The air, thick with cordite and chemical residues from the explosions, would suddenly grow heavy and torrential. Discolored rain would fall, sometimes black with soot. Sailors spoke of waterspouts forming in unusual numbers or lightning that seemed to crackle with a strange greenish hue. Were these just coincidences, or was the sheer energy of modern warfare physically altering the atmosphere? The hypothesis that emerged, whispered among meteorologists and scientists at the time, was that the war itself was acting as an unintentional, chaotic form of weather modification. The immense heat from citywide firebombings like the raids on Dresden and Tokyo created massive thermal updrafts, pyrocumulus clouds that could, in theory, trigger their own weather systems, including thunderstorms and violent winds. The countless tons of particulates, dust, and chemical aerosols blasted into the atmosphere by artillery barrages and explosions could have acted as unintended cloud seeding agents, providing the nuclei for rain and snow to form where they otherwise would not have. This theory posits that the balance of the planet's weather system, already a complex and delicate dance of energy and moisture, was being violently disturbed. The atmosphere was being saturated with unprecedented levels of pollutants and energy in highly concentrated areas. This could have created atmospheric instabilities, localized ripples in the planet's climate that manifested as these freak weather events. The war, in this view, was not just scarring the land, but was also leaving invisible wounds in the sky. The strange storms were echoes of the battles fought below, nature's chaotic response to the immense and violent release of man-made energy. The end of World War II did not bring an end to the atmospheric disturbances it had set in motion. The legacy of these weather warfare experiments, both intentional and accidental, is one of lingering instability. By aggressively probing and polluting the atmosphere, the war may have pushed regional climate systems into a more erratic and unpredictable state. The sheer volume of pollutants, soot, chemicals, and fine particulates injected into the upper atmosphere did not simply vanish when the guns fell silent. These aerosols could linger for years, subtly altering the reflectivity of the clouds, the amount of solar radiation reaching the surface, and the temperature gradients that drive our weather patterns. This atmospheric contamination created a new, uncertain baseline for our planet's climate. Think of it as adding a handful of sand into the delicate gears of a finely tuned watch. The immediate effect might be small, but over time, the intricate mechanism begins to behave erratically. The strange droughts and unseasonal floods that were reported in the years immediately following the war could be seen not as isolated acts of God, but as lagging indicators of this profound atmospheric disruption. The natural rhythms of the weather had been tampered with, and the system was struggling to find a new equilibrium, resulting in more frequent and intense extremes. Furthermore, the knowledge gained during these wartime experiments did not disappear. It proliferated, forming the basis for decades of weather modification research during the Cold War. The practice of cloud seeding became more widespread, used for everything from agricultural rainmaking to attempts at hurricane mitigation, each intervention adding another layer of complexity and potential instability to the system. The military even used weather as a weapon, overtly during the Vietnam War in Operation Popeye, seeding clouds to prolong the monsoon season and disrupt enemy supply lines. The ghost of World War II's weather warfare ambitions lived on, continuing to treat the sky as a domain to be controlled. Ultimately, the most profound legacy of this era is a conceptual one. World War II normalized the idea that humanity could and should intervene in the planet's fundamental systems for strategic gain. It fostered a dangerous confidence in our ability to manage forces we barely understood, a hubris that continues to this day in discussions around large-scale geoengineering as a solution to climate change. The strange storms and failed experiments of the 1940s serve as a stark and enduring warning. They remind us that the atmosphere is not a simple machine to be tinkered with, but a vast, interconnected and chaotic system that often reacts to our provocations in ways we can neither predict nor control. While bombs rained from the sky and tanks carved scars across the earth, another, more insidious war was being fought in the sterile silence of laboratories. This was a war against life itself, a conflict waged at a microscopic level with weapons invisible to the naked eye. Scientists on both sides of the conflict were conscripted into a grim race to develop and weaponize living organisms. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, and toxins were meticulously studied, cultivated, and refined, not to cure disease, but to inflict it on a massive scale. The goal was to create the ultimate invisible weapon, a silent, self-replicating killer that could bypass fortifications, sow panic, and decimate an enemy population before they even knew they were under attack. The concept of biological warfare was not new. History is rife with examples of armies poisoning wells or catapulting diseased corpses over castle walls. But World War II brought an industrial scale and a terrifying scientific rigor to this ancient horror. State-sponsored programs poured immense resources into identifying the deadliest pathogens and finding the most effective ways to deliver them. The list of potential agents read like a catalogue of humanity's worst nightmares: anthrax with its hardy, long-lasting spores, smallpox, a highly contagious and disfiguring virus, plague, the Black Death that had terrorized medieval Europe, and botulinum toxin, the most potent poison known to science, capable of killing with just a microscopic dose. The strategic appeal of these weapons was undeniable. A biological attack could be covert, its effects delayed, making it difficult to trace back to its source. It targeted not soldiers or infrastructure, but the very fabric of society, the health of its people, and the safety of its food supply. A single, well-placed release of a virulent pathogen could trigger an epidemic that would overwhelm hospitals, disrupt supply chains, and shatter civilian morale far more effectively than a conventional bombing raid. The laboratory, once a place of healing and discovery, was transformed into a factory floor for producing weapons of mass contagion, where scientists worked to make nature's deadliest creations even more efficient. This dark pursuit required a chilling detachment from the human consequences of such weapons. It was a war fought with pipettes and petri dishes, but its potential for suffering was immeasurable. The scientists involved were explorers charting a new and terrible frontier of warfare, pushing the boundaries of ethics and morality in the name of national security. They sought to harness the fundamental processes of life and death, turning the very act of breathing or eating into a potential vector for destruction. This was the dawn of the modern biological arms race, an era that would leave a permanent and deeply unsettling legacy on our relationship with the natural world. Deep in the occupied territory of Manchuria, hidden from the world under the guise of a water purification facility, lay the epicenter of the Japanese Empire's biological warfare program, the infamous Unit 731. Here, in a sprawling complex of laboratories, prisons and testing grounds, the theoretical horrors of biological warfare were made brutally real. Under the command of General Shiro Ishii, a chillingly ambitious microbiologist, Unit 731 conducted some of the most depraved human experiments in history. Their work was not just about cultivating pathogens, it was about testing their lethality and transmission methods on living human subjects, referred to callously by the researchers as maruta or logs. The experiments conducted at Unit 731 were a systematic descent into barbarism. Prisoners, including Chinese civilians, Korean resistance fighters, and Allied prisoners of war, were subjected to unimaginable torments in the name of science. They were intentionally infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid to study the progression of the diseases. Some were tied to stakes in open fields, while plague-infested fleas were released from low-flying aircraft to test dispersal methods. Others were subjected to vivisection without anesthesia to observe how diseases ravaged their internal organs in real time. Frostbite experiments, weapons testing, and pressure chamber simulations were conducted with a complete and total disregard for human life. The ultimate goal of Unit 731 was to produce weapons for use against enemy populations. They developed sophisticated ceramic bombs, designed not to explode with shrapnel, but to shatter on impact and release a cloud of deadly microbes or plague-infected fleas over a target city. These weapons were not just tested in the lab, they were deployed in the field. During the war, the Japanese army dropped these biological bombs on several Chinese cities, including Ningbo and Chengde, causing outbreaks of plague and cholera that killed thousands of civilians. They also contaminated wells and distributed poisoned food, waging a campaign of biological terror against the Chinese populace. After Japan's surrender, the horrors of Unit 731 were systematically covered up. In exchange for their data on human experimentation, data the United States was eager to obtain for its own bioweapons program, General Ishii and his top researchers were granted immunity from prosecution for war crimes. The facility was largely demolished by the retreating Japanese to hide the evidence, but the legacy of their work endured. They had not only unleashed disease upon innocent people, but had also cultivated and potentially released new, more virulent strains of pathogens into the environment, a biological contamination whose full extent remains a terrifying and unresolved question. On the other side of the world, off the rugged coast of Scotland, lies a small windswept island that became the site of Britain's most notorious biological weapons trial. Its name is Gruinard, and for nearly 50 years it was one of the most dangerous and contaminated places on Earth. In 1942, as the threat of a German invasion loomed, British military scientists from the Porton Down Research Facility sought a remote location to test the viability of a weaponized form of anthrax. Gruinard Island, uninhabited and isolated, was deemed the perfect outdoor laboratory for an experiment that would have devastating and long-lasting environmental consequences. The experiment was grimly straightforward. A flock of sheep was transported to the island and tethered in place. A specially designed bomb filled with a highly virulent strain of Bacillus anthracis, known as the Volume 14578 strain, was detonated upwind. The goal was to observe how the invisible cloud of anthrax spores would drift with the wind, and how effectively it would infect and kill the animals. The test was a horrifying success. Within days, all the sheep were dead, their carcasses grotesquely swollen from the effects of the disease. The scientists had proven the efficacy of an anthrax bomb, but in doing so, they had rendered the entire island lethally toxic. The problem with anthrax is its incredible resilience. The spores can survive in soil for decades, even centuries, remaining viable and deadly, waiting to be inhaled or ingested by a new host. The 1942 experiment had saturated Gruinard's soil with these microscopic time bombs. The island was immediately declared off limits, a no-go zone quarantined by the government. Warning signs were erected along its coast, forbidding landing under penalty of law. For almost half a century, Gruinard Island served as a stark and terrifying monument to the permanent consequences of biological warfare, a beautiful green landscape that harbored an invisible and incurable death, a place where nature itself was held hostage by a military experiment. It was not until the 1980s that a serious effort was made to decontaminate the island. In a massive and costly cleanup operation, the most heavily contaminated areas of topsoil were removed, and the entire island was sprayed with hundreds of tons of formaldehyde solution, diluted in seawater to kill any remaining spores. In 1990, after a new flock of sheep was allowed to graze on the island for months without any ill effects, the government officially declared Gruinard safe. Yet the legacy persists. The experiment stands as a chilling real-world example of how a single biological weapons test can create an environmental disaster zone that lasts for generations, a permanent scar on the land. Beyond the microscopic world of viruses and bacteria, military scientists explored another disturbing avenue of biological warfare: entomological warfare, the use of insects to transmit disease or destroy enemy agriculture. The concept leveraged nature's own delivery systems, turning common pests into agents of destruction. Insects, with their ability to fly, crawl, and reproduce rapidly, offered a unique method for spreading pathogens over a wide area. Research programs were established to study which insects were the most effective vectors, how they could be bred in massive numbers, and how they could be deployed against an enemy without harming friendly forces. The Japanese program at Unit 731 was particularly advanced in this field. They devoted enormous resources to breeding fleas, the primary vectors for bubonic plague. Special incubators were designed to raise millions of fleas, which were then fed on plague-infected rats to arm them with the deadly Yersinia pestis bacterium. These weaponized insects were then loaded into the ceramic bombs developed by General Ishii's team. When dropped from an airplane, the bomb would shatter, releasing a living cloud of infected fleas to bite and infect anyone in the target area, starting a devastating plague epidemic that would spread naturally through the population. The Allies were also deeply concerned about the agricultural impact of entomological warfare. Both sides investigated the potential of using insects to attack enemy crops, aiming to trigger a famine that would cripple the war effort from within. The Colorado potato beetle, a voracious pest of potato crops, was a primary subject of study. There is evidence that Germany developed a program to drop large numbers of these beetles over English farmland, and the British in turn made defensive preparations and explored retaliatory strikes. The idea was to create a scorched earth effect, not with fire, but with a swarm of hungry insects that would decimate a nation's food supply. While no large-scale entomological attacks on crops were confirmed during the war, the research itself represented a profound violation of the natural order. It involved taking living creatures and twisting their biological purpose to serve a military objective. This research didn't just create weapons, it created the potential for ecological catastrophe. The intentional introduction of a massive non-native insect population could have had unpredictable and uncontrollable effects on the local ecosystem, potentially creating a permanent pest problem that would linger long after the war was over. It was another example of the war's willingness to risk long-term environmental chaos for short-term strategic gain. The end of the war did not erase the legacy of these biological experiments. In the chaos of collapsing regimes and hurried evacuations, containment protocols were often broken. Secret laboratories were abandoned, contaminated test sites were forgotten, and vials of weaponized pathogens were lost or improperly destroyed. These deadly microbes, painstakingly selected and bred for resilience and virulence, escaped their man-made prisons and were released into the wild. They were no longer confined to petri dishes and test tubes. They were now part of the natural environment, free to interact, mutate, and evolve in ways their creators had never intended. This unintentional release has left a strange and disturbing mark on the planet. Today, decades after the war, microbiologists studying soil and water samples from old battlefields and the areas surrounding former bioweapons facilities sometimes make startling discoveries. They find strains of bacteria and viruses with unusual genetic markers, organisms that show signs of laboratory manipulation. These ghost cells, as some scientists call them, are the living descendants of the escaped weapons. They are the survivors of a secret war, carrying a genetic history that separates them from their naturally occurring cousins, a silent testament to the experiments that spawned them. The long-term consequences of this genetic pollution are largely unknown and honestly deeply unsettling. Once released into the complex web of an ecosystem, these organisms are subject to the pressures of natural selection. They can exchange genetic material with wild microbes, a process known as horizontal gene transfer. This means that the traits that made them effective weapons, such as antibiotic resistance or increased virulence, could potentially be passed on to other, more common pathogens. The war may have inadvertently created a reservoir of dangerous genetic information, a microbial Pandora's box that once opened could never be closed again. These mutated survivors represent one of the most enduring and invisible legacies of World War II. They exist at the intersection of human conflict and natural evolution, a permanent alteration to the planet's microbiome. They are a reminder that what is created in a laboratory does not always stay there. The attempt to control and weaponize life resulted in a loss of control, unleashing new and unpredictable biological entities into the world. The war may have ended, but in the soil beneath our feet, a microscopic battle continues, waged by the ghost cells and mutated survivors of a conflict that changed nature forever. Narrator, WWII. If you found this story as fascinating and unsettling as we did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like and share this video with your friends. Join us as we continue to explore the unseen battles shaping our world. Your support helps us bring more hidden history to light. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the world changed in a single, blinding flash. The city of Hiroshima was the first target. A United States bomber released the atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, from high above. In less than a second, a sphere of white-hot fire erupted, brighter than the sun, vaporizing everything at its center. Buildings dissolved, shadows burned into stone. People vanished in the blink of an eye. The roar of the explosion echoed for miles, followed by a deadly silence, a silence so deep it seemed the earth itself was holding its breath. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. Another bomb, Fat Man, unleashed the unimaginable. Both cities were reduced to ruins. The human cost was terrifying. Over 200,000 souls lost to fire, radiation and fallout. But as the world mourned, a different, quieter transformation began. The land itself was poisoned, scorched by radiation. Nothing, it seemed, could ever live there again. Yet the story was not over. This was not just the end of a war. It was the beginning of a new era, one where nature would face the greatest test of survival in its ancient history. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not just kill. They unleashed invisible forces, radiation and heat, on a scale never seen before on Earth. The air shimmered with energy, the soil was laced with deadly isotopes, water and wind carried fallout far beyond the blast zones. It was as if humans had opened a forbidden door, letting loose powers that did not belong in the natural world. Scientists came to study the ruins, expecting only death. Yet, what they found defied every expectation. In the heart of destruction, life would soon begin to stir. The atomic bomb was meant to end the war, but its shockwaves would ripple through the planet for generations. The survivors, human and otherwise, were changed forever. The cities became living laboratories, testing grounds for nature's resilience and adaptability. What happened next would challenge everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between death and life. Weeks after the atomic blasts, something astonishing happened. Amid the blackened rubble, tiny shoots of green began to emerge. Grasses pushed through cracks in the concrete. Weeds found their way between fallen stones. Soon the ruins were dotted with wildflowers, small, defiant bursts of color in a sea of gray. Scientists were startled. How could anything survive here, let alone grow? The soil was radioactive, filled with cesium, strontium, and plutonium. The rains that fell were black rain, heavy with ash and poison. Yet nature, against all odds, was refusing to surrender. Birds returned before any people did. Sparrows nested in twisted girders. Crows circled overhead, scavenging among the ruins. Even small mammals crept in from the forests at the city's edge. Some animals showed strange deformities, white patches, odd beaks, twisted tails. But they were alive. In the midst of devastation, life was reinventing itself, adapting at a speed never seen before. By the next spring, the change was impossible to ignore. Cherry trees bloomed where only months before nothing had stood but ash. Ferns and moss crept up the sides of melted stone. Scientists documented the growth with disbelief, noting how some plants seemed to thrive better than ever. The roots pushed deep, seeking water, pulling nutrients from soil most believed was hopelessly contaminated. Some species, it turned out, had a hidden resilience to radiation, a trait never observed until the bombs fell. This unexpected rebirth became a living symbol of hope. The world watched as Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not remain barren wastelands. The scars were deep, but nature's drive to survive was deeper still. The bomb had changed everything, but it had not finished the story of life in these cities. Instead, it had forced a new chapter, one written in the language of mutation, adaptation, and transformation. Nature's return to the bombed cities was not simple recovery, it was mutation. Radiation changed evolution's rules. Plants grew twisted, trees warped, and animals mutated. Some species died, but others gained new strengths, resistance, new habits, rapid reproduction. Fungi were the strangest black molds thrived, feeding on radiation, turning deadly rays into energy. Scientists called these radiotrophic fungi, a phenomenon never seen before. For decades, these survivors became research subjects. Could their secrets help humans? The bombs didn't just destroy, they rewrote DNA, forcing nature to adapt in ways we're still discovering. The invisible hand of radiation became a ruthless agent of evolution. Some life vanished, but what remained was forever changed. The story of survival became one of transformation. The forests around Hiroshima and Nagasaki glowed faintly at night. Plants and fungi, altered by radiation. Trees grew in spirals, animals behaved strangely, and the land carried an uneasy silence. These were not just oddities, but warnings. Nature could adapt, but it would never be the same. Decades later, radioactive hotspots lingered and rare genetic conditions appeared in children. Yet the glowing fungi helped purify the soil, turning the forests into living laboratories. Scientists studied these changes, hoping to heal other scarred lands. The forests became symbols, a reminder that the power to destroy is also the power to change forever. Nature survives, but it never forgets. The glowing woods whispered a chilling truth. The earth remembers. The atomic bombs marked a turning point for the planet. Explosions forced rapid evolution, mutating and transforming life. This didn't stop in Japan. Nuclear tests worldwide spread fallout, prompting nature to adapt everywhere. Coral reefs grew around sunken ships, mosses colonized radioactive rocks, and distant species bore atomic imprints. The lesson: nature adapts, persists, and transforms, but not always for the better. Some species thrived, others vanished, some mutations healed, others harmed. The scars remain in land, air, and DNA. The bomb's greatest secret was how it forced the Earth to change. The war ended, but the story of adaptation had just begun. The bombs changed the meaning of survival, for nature and for us. Subscribe to Mysterious Nature for more secrets, because the planet always remembers. As bombs fell, a quieter race began. Scientists sought new, unseen energies. Secret labs experimented with electromagnetic fields, radio waves, and plasma. Machines pulsed, disrupting electronics and even animal behavior. Every breakthrough was shrouded in secrecy and fear. Ambitions ran wild, invisible ships, citywide blackouts, death rays. Science fiction blurred with reality as nature's forces became targets for control. But the risks grew: malfunctions, illnesses, and strange animal reactions. The quest for secret energy sparked a silent revolution, leaving scars long after the war. Military scientists pushed the limits of electromagnetic waves, radar invisibility, and weaponized energy. Legends like the Philadelphia experiment emerged, ships vanishing, crews disoriented. Declassified files confirmed strange experiments, ships bombarded with waves to fool sensors. The effects leaked out. Compasses spun, birds fell, plants twisted, and auroras danced. Manipulating energy warped the world beyond the lab. The electromagnetic spectrum runs through all life. Tampering with it risked unknown consequences. The war of invisible forces was a gamble with nature itself. To control energy was to risk the unpredictable. The consequences were beyond any nation's control. Scientists turned to plasma, the fourth state of matter, glowing with energy. Secret facilities created plasma bursts, filling rooms with ghostly green light. Witnesses felt pressure, saw metal vibrate, and animals avoided the area. Researchers suffered headaches and burns. Outside, birds dropped and fish floated. The land seemed haunted by invisible fires. Plasma and high-energy experiments altered the environment at a molecular level. Radiation changed plants, microbes, and water. The quest for new weapons left a mark in nature that would last for decades. After the war, scientists found lasting changes where energy experiments took place. Forests grew in spirals, rocks pulsed magnetically, rivers shimmered, soil minerals fused in strange ways, bacteria and fungi mutated, some glowing. Nature wasn't passive, it adapted, fought back, rewrote its rules. Some sites became magnetic anomalies, avoided by wildlife and people. The Earth's molecules were changed by secret energy pursuits. Every experiment was a silent battle between ambition and nature. To bend Earth's energies is to awaken forces we barely understand. When the war ended, nature began its quiet reclamation. Tanks rusted, overtaken by ivy. Forests healed. Saplings grew through wreckage. Bunkers crumbled under tree roots, becoming mossy grottos. Nature didn't erase war's scars, it transformed them. Bombed buildings became cliffs for birds, craters turned into ponds, trenches became burrows for animals. New habitats emerged from conflict. The wild rewrote the architecture of war. Nature's message: human monuments are temporary, but the earth endures. The war was a storm, nature's recovery, a slow, steady renewal. From ruins, a new wilderness was born. The war was not confined to the land, it scarred the oceans as well. The seabeds of the world became graveyards for thousands of vessels, from mighty battleships and aircraft carriers to humble cargo ships and submarines. Sent to the depths by torpedoes and bombs, they settled into the silent darkness, tombs of twisted steel, destined, it seemed, to rust into nothingness. But here too, in the vast, deep wilderness of the ocean, nature began its work of reclamation. The instruments of death, once symbols of naval power, were about to be given a startling new purpose. They were to become cradles of life. In the warm, clear waters of the Pacific, particularly in places like Truk Lagoon, the transformation was, honestly, spectacular. The sunken Japanese fleet, a ghost armada resting on the seafloor, began to attract the smallest pioneers of the ocean. Algae and tiny invertebrates were the first to arrive, coating the hard metal surfaces in a thin living film. This created a foundation for corals to take root. Slowly, painstakingly, coral polyps began to build their intricate limestone skeletons on the decks, guns, and bridges of the sunken warships. Over decades, these individual colonies grew and merged, creating vibrant, complex reef systems where none had existed before. These new artificial reefs became bustling metropolises of marine life. The hollowed-out hulls of the ships provided shelter from predators and strong currents. Angelfish and butterflyfish darted through the bridges where captains once stood. Moray eels made their homes in the barrels of anti-aircraft guns. Schools of barracuda patrolled the ghostly flight decks of sunken carriers. The ships, designed to project death across the waves, had been transformed into sanctuaries. They had become vertical islands of biodiversity, their very structure offering a complex habitat of ledges, caves, and overhangs that supported an incredible density of life. This cycle of creation from destruction is one of nature's most profound forms of revenge. It takes humanity's most violent creations and absorbs them, neutralizes their original purpose, and transforms them into engines of creation. A torpedo hole becomes a doorway for a sea turtle. A cargo hold filled with ammunition becomes a nursery for groupers. Nature does not forget the intrusion, it simply overwrites it. The warships did not disappear, they were transfigured, their dark history encrusted with the brilliant living jewelry of the reef, a testament to life's unyielding power to find a way, even in the graveyards of war. While not a direct result of World War II, the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl is the ultimate epilogue to the story of the atomic bomb, a terrifying real-world experiment in what happens when humanity's most dangerous creation escapes our control. In 1986, the reactor's explosion rendered a vast swath of Ukraine and Belarus uninhabitable for humans for thousands of years. The Chernobyl exclusion zone became a place of fear and desolation, a radioactive ghost town. Humanity fled, leaving behind a poisoned landscape, and, in our absence, the most unexpected and powerful form of nature's revenge began. Freed from the constant pressure of human activity, from farming, logging, hunting, and pollution, wildlife did not just return to the exclusion zone, it flourished. The populations of native species exploded. Herds of wild boar and roe deer roam the abandoned streets of Pripyat. The rivers, once used to cool the reactor, now teem with fish. Most astonishingly, species that were rare or extinct in other parts of Europe have found a refuge here. Packs of grey wolves, numbering in the hundreds, hunt freely. The Eurasian lynx, a creature of deep wilderness, has made a comeback. Even the Przewalski's horse, an endangered wild horse reintroduced to the zone, has established a thriving, self-sustaining population. This radioactive Eden presents a stunning and honestly uncomfortable paradox. The environment is still deeply contaminated. The animals carry levels of radiation in their bodies that would be lethal to humans. Yet the ecosystem as a whole appears to be thriving. The absence of people, it seems, is more beneficial to these species than the presence of deadly radiation is harmful. It's a chilling conclusion that we, humanity, are a greater threat to the natural world than our own worst nuclear accident. The zone has become an involuntary wildlife preserve, a terrifying testament to nature's resilience when we are simply not there. The story of Chernobyl is nature's ultimate revenge. We created a poison so potent we could not endure it, and in doing so, we unintentionally created a sanctuary. The animals that live there are a constant living reminder of the world that re-emerges when human dominion is removed. They are ghosts haunting our failure, thriving in the ruins of our greatest technological folly. They prove that nature does not need us to survive. In fact, in the most extreme cases, it survives best when we are gone, reclaiming its territory with a silent, radioactive, and undeniable power. As we look back at the aftermath of World War II, from the vine-choked tanks to the coral-encrusted warships and the thriving wildlife of Chernobyl, a clear and powerful pattern emerges. Every bomb, every experiment, every scar that humanity left upon the face of the earth did not result in a final victory over nature. Instead, each act of destruction became an unintended seed for nature's evolution. Where we brought death, life found a new form. Where we created wastelands, new ecosystems, bizarre and beautiful, rose from the ashes. Nature did not simply heal, it adapted, it mutated, it transformed. This is the ultimate form of nature's revenge, not a vengeful conscious act of retribution, but the quiet, undeniable consequence of its own fundamental laws. We sought to control the weather, and the atmosphere grew more unstable. We sought to weaponize disease, and microbes learned new ways to survive and spread. We unleashed the atom, and life itself learned to feed on its fire. Our attempts to dominate the planet only served to accelerate its evolution, pushing it down strange and unpredictable paths. We thought we were writing the rules, but we were merely providing the catalyst for a new chapter we could not control. The legacy of these experiments is a profound and humbling warning. It teaches us that nature is not a static backdrop for human drama, nor is it a machine to be engineered or a resource to be endlessly exploited. It is a dynamic, complex and resilient system that responds to pressure and damage in ways we are only just beginning to comprehend. The war showed us that when pushed to the brink, nature doesn't just break, it reinvents. The glowing fungi, the radiotrophic molds, the wolves of Chernobyl, they are not monsters. They are our children, the offspring of our own destructive genius. This history is not just a collection of fascinating and disturbing anecdotes. It is a mirror reflecting a possible future. The experiments of World War II were a dress rehearsal for the larger, planetary-scale experiment we are conducting today with climate change, pollution, and mass extinction. We continue to wage a kind of war against the natural world, driven by the same hubris that fueled the secret programs of the 1940s. Nature's revenge, then, is not a threat of a future attack. It is an ongoing process, a continuous response to our actions. The world didn't just change then, it is changing now, because of us. The echoes of the Second World War have faded from living memory, its battles now stories confined to history books and aging photographs. The roar of engines and the thunder of explosions have been replaced by the quiet hum of a world rebuilt. But the true conclusion of that conflict was not the signing of treaties or the redrawing of maps. The war's deepest and most enduring legacy is etched into the planet itself, written in the language of mutated genes, altered climates and ecosystems, forever changed. The secret experiments and awesome weaponry unleashed during those years did not just change humanity. They fundamentally and irrevocably changed the Earth, setting in motion a chain reaction that continues to unfold to this very day. We look back now at the hubris of that era, at the scientists who sought to command the storms, to weaponize plagues, and to harness the very energies that bind the universe. In their desperate pursuit of victory, they saw nature not as a home, but as an arsenal. They treated the planet as a laboratory, a testing ground for their most audacious and dangerous ideas. They succeeded in ways they never intended. They proved that humanity possessed the power to disrupt the planet's most fundamental systems, but they also revealed a more profound truth, that nature is not a passive victim. It is an active, dynamic force that responds, adapts, and transforms in the face of attack, often with consequences far beyond our ability to predict or control. The story of World War II's environmental impact is therefore not just history, it is a solemn warning. It is a parable for our modern age, where we continue to wage a different kind of war against the planet. We may not be dropping atomic bombs or seeding hurricanes for military gain, but our industrial activities, our relentless consumption, and our pollution of the air, land, and sea are an assault on the same global systems. We continue to operate with the same dangerous assumption that we can dominate nature without consequence, that we can bend its laws to our will without provoking a response. The strange storms, the ghost cells, and the glowing forests of the 1940s were the planet's initial chaotic reply to our provocations. The question that haunts us now is what form nature's response will take in the 21st century. As we push the climate into instability and drive species to extinction at an unprecedented rate, we are conducting the largest, most uncontrolled experiment in Earth's history. The war taught us that when we try to control nature, it learns to control us, pushing back with a power we cannot match. The next great conflict may not be fought between nations with tanks and planes. It may be a quieter, more desperate struggle between humanity and a planet that we have tried and failed to conquer. The Earth refuses to bury these secrets because in their memory lies our only hope for understanding the future we are currently creating. Join us in spreading awareness. Subscribe, comment, and share to help us protect our planet for future generations.